Hi, I'm Sam Pressler.
I'm PJ Walsh, and this is In Stitches, the podcast that explores the humanity and humor.
That's right, and today we have one of the more eclectic and fascinating people I've come to know, Yoko Sen. She's originally from Japan, dropped out of high school, eventually became an internationally renowned ambient electronic musician, and is now one of the kind of foremost leaders in rethinking the way that hospitals and the healthcare system sounds in a way to improve people's well-being.
This is a great interview, Sam, and I'd like to add that I basically did nothing.
Why? Well, why is that, PJ?
Because I got an amazing email from you, David, and off it popped how excited you were to meet her. So I am going to step down in this interview from my position and pass the baton to you, because I think your passion radiated, and I know that you really want to be part of this.
So hello, I'm David Bobrow, executive producer of this podcast. Normally, I'm very comfortable behind the boards, but and I appreciate that PJ would let me take over for this one. What a guy!
He's a great guy, but more interestingly, this interview is about Yoko Sen.
What, I'm not interesting at all? Jesus, Sean, this is awful. I stepped down.
Without further ado, Yoko Sen. I'm gonna take a deep breath, get myself in interview mode.
Yeah, I wish I had a moment to meditate or something. I feel like I rushed into.
We have time. We could do a group meditation.
Oh, great! Or just sort of take a breath.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, let's come back to ourselves in a minute or so.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. I will say, I think this is going to be the first episode that we started with a silent meditation. So it's exciting. Man. And I think we can get into the conversation.
Yes.
Yes. I'd love for you to maybe lay the foundation of your personal and professional life and where you are right now in that regard.
Yes. By definition, I guess I am founder of Sen Sound, and there is a lot of dispute about what Sen Sound is. And on paper, it's a small business, but it kind of doesn't make sense because at least half of what we do, we intend to make no, financial profit off of it. We hybrid kind of. We have a small team of researchers and designers for sound. And everything we do is about improving the sound experience and sound environment in healthcare. We work with hospital organizations, medical device companies to do different collaborative design projects to improve the sound. I also do speaking engagements, lots of educational programs to help people listen more intently and help people understand the importance of sound. Is that okay? I try not to go into that.
No, wrong answer. Try
wrong answer. Yes.
You describe yourself as we.
Yes.
So what is your role within the organization?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I've always used the pronoun we, even during the majority of the years, the Sen Sound was technically just me and a bunch of people who are trying to help, but I always say we, partly because I feel that in many ways I'm a spokesperson of this larger issue where many people, whether they are directly part of Sen Sound or not, there are lots of people who are trying to make a difference in this particular field of sound in healthcare. And it just doesn't feel right for me to say I do this, even though certain projects kind of I did it, but still I feel like it's a collective we in some way, so I feel more comfortable using the word we.
Yeah, So, I mean, I'm actually very interested now in where you started. So, like, where did you grow up? What was your family life like? Can you take us
Yes,
to young Yoko?
young Yoko. I was born and raised in Nagano, Japan. Nagano was a place of a Winter Olympic, and I moved to more than 10 places by the time I was 10. All within Japan, but lots of moving. My father was a forest ecologist, and with his research and earlier position in the government, we just had to move every few years. I thought that's what everybody else does. So I didn't second guess that kind of a lifestyle. And I don't really have an attachment to any particular area in Japan as a hometown. And I think that might have contributed to the path of my life that I left Japan immediately after high school by myself, and I did not speak English, and I did not know anyone in the United States. And I had a rather troubled time in high school period. I before that I was this stereotypical straight A student who was very obedient and didn't really rebel against anything. And I guess I had a reaction to the early years or something, and had a experience of mental health issues as early as age 16, and dropped out of high school, dropped out of sort of a expected path as a Japanese person of my generation. And at that point, people often say, like, wow, you're so brave that you just left your country and you just came here. But it felt more risky to me to just stay in the environment that I felt confined back in Japan, that starting over from the scratch in a place where there is no context for me and no one knows, me, felt somewhat less risky to me at that point. So I left. Yeah. So that's the early years.
You started as a musician early on.
Yes.
Was music part of the rigidity that you were rebelling against? Was there a turning point where you went from playing others' work to writing your own?
I appreciate you asking that question. I started the piano when I was 3. My mother insists it was me who insisted that I had to take piano lessons. Of course, I don't remember that age. There are lots of, kids in Japan whose parents just sort of impose piano and violin lessons. But in my case, so my mom took me to a piano teacher in the neighborhood, and my hands were too small as a 3-year-old. So the teacher said, maybe you can wait until you turn 5. And apparently I did a temper tantrum, which I don't remember. So the lesson started. I consider music to be my first language because of that. And maybe Japanese is my second language and English is the third. I mean, maybe I was speaking Japanese a little bit at that point, but I think I found I have a vague memory that my first memory was I was, like a baby looking outside the window, and I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I am so happy I got born as a human, because if I'm a monkey, I can't choose to end my own life now. So it's nice I have a choice. That's my first memory. It's kind of weird, right? And later years I worked with a different therapist trying to find out was there any traumatic incident there that I don't even remember. And it doesn't seem to be the case. Years of, psychoanalysis and therapy didn't really bring up anything from those years. So And when I discovered, I think it was some neighborhood girl playing Four Elise by Beethoven. And that was sort of a thunderstruck moment. I kind of remember that like, wow, I have a way out of this weird confined dark room where I feel isolated, but that's the way I get out of here. Like that was a sensation. So I think when I guess I had to beg my mother that's my way out of here. And I think, since then I continue to play piano. Then in elementary school, I was in a choir, so I was singing. In middle school, I was playing the clarinet in a school symphony band. In high school, I was playing the drums, and then I was in like a jazz band and jazz funk band with a bunch of 30 years old. A bunch of things. And I think music was helping me, and also maybe making my life difficult at the same time. I don't know. Yeah.
How so?
Because I think it gives you a clue that life can be more than this. Life can be more than what teachers and parents tell you what it is. So without that doubt, maybe life can be a little easier. But in high school, somehow I had this nagging feeling that there is more to life than this. And that made me suffer.
So to me, just something I'm reflecting on is you talk about, music being what was both a way out and what was also something that made life more challenging. But when I think about kind of your comment a little bit earlier around, you didn't know anyone when you left Japan, you you didn't speak any other languages.
Right.
It does seem that music, if that was your first language, is also a universal language that you can draw on and use wherever you go. So like what role did the music play in either giving you the confidence or enabling you to kind of pursue that path and make that decision to leave?
I love you asking that question. So in Japanese education system, we still take English classes for, at least 6 years. But it's more of a linguistic study of the English grammar. So it won't prepare you to be able to speak and communicate. And the first 3 months of me, I was in Southern California, first in a language school, and then I started out in community college. But in the language school time, it took me about 3 months to start to be able to kind of understand what people are saying or what the radio and things. But I still had to survive the first 3 months somehow, right? So I had to rely on developing this instinct to hear the tone of people's voices. So when I cannot understand what people are saying, how people are saying what they are saying, like does this person sound like this person is being honest and nice, or somewhat sketchy or angry or whatnot. So I think that focusing on the tone of people's voice definitely came from my background as a musician. But going back to your point, Dave, at that point I had no experience in creating my own music. It's more of a playing other people's music. On the basis I'm very introverted. I was around the time I took the Myers-Briggs personality test. I scored 100 on introvert. Not even somewhere in middle. So, I would take a theater class in the community college because I thought that would help me overcome a bit of my shyness and speak in front of other people. And I vividly remember each of the students had to read a passage from Jonathan Livingston Seagull or something like that, right? And everybody had to go up to the microphone. I was so shy and I was mortified. I really couldn't do it. And a student said, is that like a genetic thing or something specific to your culture, like a racial thing that makes you very shy and you can't talk in front of other people? I would write something in the class and people would say, this is written in alphabet, but this is not English. So I had to go to sort of a writing center every day after the class to learn how to write, which is such an irony today because what I do is write the talk and travel to talk in front of other people, which is to make a point that, being a musician and all, I actually started out in a place that I was really, really not good at doing any of the things I do today.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. So what made you want to start writing your own music?
Thank you. So it was a few years later. So, I was in community college for 2 years, transferred then to a 4-year university in Washington, D.C. And it was the last semester in my college years. And I wasn't even studying music. I was studying international affairs, which, has really nothing to do with things. And the final semester, I was still taking music classes, alongside my other international affairs courses. And I was taking a jazz voice class. And my teacher was a vocalist I really admired. And she used to sing for this band called Thievery Corporation. And there are a couple of hit songs that she sang, and she was teaching in the university, jazz voice. And I really, really, admired her. And it was kind of a dream that every week I go to lesson and it's her who, like, I get to learn the music and voice. And this story is so crazy. It almost sounds like an external narrative, but it is not. So one day, it was February, winter, I woke up and, wow, I'm going to make electronic music today. Like, that's how it happened. Up until that day, I never created a piece of music myself. I never even touched, music making software, program, anything like that. And I just woke up and I'm making electronic music today. So I went to this kind of a random friend who, at his home, he had some studio equipment and a setup. And I said, could I use your equipment for like 3-4 hours and just like make music? And he's like, sure. And I sat there and spent 3-4 hours, and I had a piece of music done. And that piece had some drum and bass line and piano and some singing and some lyrics. It was just done. And I was like, wow, how did that happen? That's kind of crazy. And I was really looking forward to sharing that piece with the voice teacher on the lesson, which was 3 days later. So I went to the lesson, and on the classroom door, there's this piece of paper. And the paper said my teacher passed away on the same day that I made the first piece of music. And yeah, it was a very complex, it was a very troubling. I got a counselor from the school immediately. And I still don't know if I fully processed the whole thing. But the music kept coming out since that day. And the story I decided to tell myself is that my teacher left me with something as she was departing. So I decided to believe in that story. Up until that time, I was too shy to make music. I felt like there was no legitimate reason for me to put those ideas out in the form of music. But somehow believing in the story that this is not mine, this is something she left, gave me an excuse and push to do that finally. And up until that point, I had some idea that one way or the other, I knew I would end up something to do with music, but I wasn't sure. But that gave me a push. So I created an album that local independent music record label released, which got a couple of like independent music awards, which gave me a visa as an artist to stay and work in this country. So that forced me to be a full-time artist. So that's how I became a musician.
First, thank you for sharing. That's just a very, personal and powerful story. One of the things I'm thinking, especially towards the end, as you say that, as you talk about this being like music being a gift kind of left to you by the teacher. And then you even alluded to some of the benefits that came in the preceding months and years after that gift. Did that, and this is partially me projecting, but did that feel at all at times like an obligation or a sense of pressure because of that relationship you had to the music?
I really appreciate every single one of questions being asked today. So the type of visa I was able to get as an artist back then was called Aliens with Extraordinary Ability visa. So that particular visa did not allow to do anything else other than activities that I was able to get the visa for, which is the music. And the visa was for 5 years. And after the 5 years, I was able to extend every year. But the condition of me being able to extend the visa is to prove to the immigration that my work has a social significance to the lives of American people. If I failed to prove that, my visa wouldn't have been renewed and I could have been deported. And at least back then, in my mind, I had no life left back home in Japan. So in a bit of a exaggerated sense, in my perception, it was a bit of a life and death every year. And music, and not just music and art for the sake of its own, but the dissemination of that piece and how it's making an impact. My, life literally depended on the outcome. And it was good and bad. Good because as a shy person, it forced me to build career, I don't like the word, but life work as an artist. And I would have had a lot of imposter syndrome to call myself an artist. But with the visa and my livelihood, depending on grant I was able to get as an artist and, income from music, I had to call myself as an artist. So that was a good way for a shy person like me to be an artist. On the other hand, you could imagine it was a very stressful, very scary time. I had no health insurance, no stability. I was living in a music studio for, a few years. And the joy, there was no space for me to feel joy in music after several years. That just became very straining. I often joke I have I'm married to music, but we live separately. That's sort of a joke I make. I'm still married, but it's like a complicated relationship, and I have a kind of a mistress, which is Sen Sound. So, music being still my first devotion, but the relationship got very strained in the process.
And I think that's actually a good transition point to get into some of your work that you're doing today in sound and health. So what really led you to transition from this musical career to being explicitly a music artist to really working at this intersection?
Yeah, so I think the turning point was the series of health complications, and that was a disruption in my life. I think that initial sign of the health complications started probably after I did the Kennedy Center Millennium Stage performance several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And typically I don't get into detail of the health complications. Part of that is talking about that experience re-triggers a little bit of that, so I don't go into that with your permission.
Mm-hmm.
But subjectively, there was a period of time that I was convinced that I would be stuck in the health condition that was making it almost impossible for me to have the normal life as I define that I had before with that condition. And there was a lot of shame, inner shame attached to that particular condition that has had the impact in my social relationship with other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pretty convinced I was stuck. And things that I thought I would do in the future and things I had to reconcile with this idea that, I can't do that anymore. And day-to-day life, like simple thing that I took for granted, became very, very difficult during that time. And I still remember to this day, I'm not a deeply religious person. I'm kind of a, casual Zen Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
But I still remember, sort of thinking that whoever that is larger than us or whatever, that, if I could be given a second chance of being able to do things in ways that I could do,
Mm-hmm.
like I would do anything, like I would suck your dick, like I was kidding. Joking, but you know what I mean? Like I would do anything. I would do anything if I could do that. And I promise to, whoever out there, why is it male? Maybe it's a female. Like I would do anything, and I would, use the rest of my life as a service. Like I had that thought. I clearly remember that. And the recovery rehabilitation wasn't so much like I was sick up until this moment and it just went away. Like it didn't happen like that. It was a slow, excruciating, I'd think I made 3 steps progress and I'd go back 4 steps, and very slow. But over the course of, and it's funny because the time was so difficult, my sense of time is a little bit messed up. But I think it was at least, year, several months. Things started to get better. And during the time the visit to hospitals happened and I had the, experience with sound environment and noise. And I was struck by how, lack of design in the sound environment and that kind of stayed with me. It was probably less about the sound, but more about my own reflection of life, that, wow, it looks like I have a second chance now, and I need something that I can do so that I can stay true to what I promised to whoever out there. And the sound and healthcare happens to be something that I thought, okay, this is something I can do. Does that make sense?
There's so much there that I can relate to and I want to dig into with you. I want to start with something that you said at the end, which was about how really the impetus and the reason you keep doing this is not so much about the sound and health aha moment, which I think if people, even including me, hear your story externally, tend to think that is like the catalyzing moment. But it's really this promise that you made to yourself in a very personal way. So I guess, how has your relationship to that narrative evolved over time? Is this something that you always felt? Is this something that now you're realizing in retrospect? Because in my life, I guess the reason I asked this question is with ASAP, I had a story that I said externally, which was around this catalyzing incident, around a suicide in my family. That was part of my story, kind of in the way that you said it, but not my whole story. And I realized the reason I continued to stay with ASAP, the reason I was so energized by the work, was by the individual relationships I formed within the community.
Right.
And so it resonates with me, particularly you sharing that latter point, because I actually would not have guessed that about you. And so I'm just interested in your reflection on that and how you've experienced that over time.
Yeah. There is an element that I wouldn't call my external narrative fiction in any way, because there is it is a element of a truth. It's just I don't, going back to the experience of a halcyon incubator, and part of that is to be able to do this pitch to a group of judgmental people who are waiting to jump on you. And part of that is, there is a implicit and explicit pressure for each fellow to, I'm not saying this, entirely negative way, but package the story in ways that could be catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Like in 10 minutes, I can't get into my personal story that much, but just enough for that to be a story. And in the process, certain part of the story gets emphasized more than the other, and the story itself starts to gain a life of its own, and you kind of start to tell yourself that was a story. So somehow that story starts to define your life in some way. I think there was an element of that. In my case, I had this awareness, the issue of a hospital noise needed like a character or a spokesperson that people can relate to somehow. And it wasn't really about me. It was more like me as a backstage playing the role of Yoko Sen, the founder of Sen Sound, playing the character. Once again, it's not a fiction, it's not a fake, but so that the issue can get the spotlight and support that it needs, that had been ignored for many years. So there was an element of a sense of a service. In my life as a musician, that wasn't the case. There was a little bit of a more of a unhealthy morphing between, like, my music is me kind of a thing. But with Sen Sound, I think I'm constantly in this mindset that this is not about me, this is never about me. So I play this character that would help people to relate to the issue. But I do certainly relate to your point. I don't know if it's appropriate to bring this in this podcast, but after our last conversation, I felt guilty a little bit, because I feel like to you, maybe I was one of the people who encouraged you and maybe even unknowingly put the pressure that, oh, your story of your family relative and the suicide, that, that's what helps people to relate. I remember, I think I told you that, and now I feel guilty that maybe that was making experience difficult for you in some way, even unknowingly.
Well, you've uncovered my master plan is to bring you on this podcast and impart you with the most massive Jewish guilt trip possible. But to address that point, I don't. Maybe this is just me being honest. I don't remember that. So maybe to not take you down a notch on your sense of importance in that.
Great.
But to bring it back to something I want to kind of a response I have, and also what I want to follow up with you on is I made that decision based on insights before I met you. Right, I was basically a college student, and I was getting external pressure to overemphasize the role of the suicide in my family as a catalyst for the founding of the organization.
I see.
And I had no experience, right? I had not ever had to tell my story publicly before, and I didn't understand what the implications would be of making that my public story.
Right.
And for me, I didn't create that boundary. And so
Right.
it was a bit of a Pandora's box. As soon as I used that as my catalyzing incident, and I do say used somewhat intentionally, because I do feel that it wasn't fully true, I lost control of it. And when I lost control of it, it created this experience for me of feeling a little bit as if I was exploiting the trauma and tragedy in my family as a means to justify my work. And that ultimately was a factor that led to my burnout, right? When the story that I was telling actually physically pained me, that becomes unsustainable. And so to bring this back to you, one of the things you said 10 minutes ago in your answer was how you were very intentional about what to share in your story and what not to share in your story, right? And you had this insight. And so I guess I'm wondering what led you to go into your storytelling with such intentionality, with such a sense of boundaries, in a sense that I didn't have the wisdom to have when I was getting started.
I really appreciate you sharing that, first of all. And this is not something that's often talked about in general, right? And it's very important, I think, that this is being talked about, number one. And luckily, I had a earlier experience being a musician and artist and having the story of my teacher's suicide. And occasionally I would share the story as a musician, and I had a very complex internal reaction to the fact that I shared the story. But then if I didn't share and people ask, just like, how did you become electronic musician, and how did you switch from playing the piano to, like, that story was a catalyst. That's what happened, So I cannot just hide what happened if I try to answer the question. So I would share, and I would feel this exactly how you described. Am I exploiting the story? And I think that when I started Sen Sound, I had a therapist. By the way, I think having a therapist is a great idea for anybody, even healthy people. Everybody should have a therapist. And we had a very intentional process to set a clear boundary as to what I'm willing to talk in public from my experience of health complications, and what I'm not willing to talk about. we even practiced a little bit, like what to say. In interviews and things, people ask and people like to push a little bit, and it's not personal. So I just had to go back to that, rehearsed phrase that I'm just not comfortable talking about it. Or, one day I will maybe be ready to talk about it, but today is not the day. And people are very respectful for the boundary. But the difference is that was a very intentional process. And I also carefully observed how I do whenever I share the story. And I had an agency to edit that boundary as well. So I kept it to the level that up until here I talk, and I only talk that. So that did not exhaust me as much. It still exhausts me a little bit. You get to the point that you are sick of hearing your voice talking about the same story. But, other than that, that process prevented me from the exhaustion.
I really appreciate you talking through your process, because it's not something that I was ever coached on going into it. And I actually, I got a therapist about a year before I left ASAP. So 4 years into doing it. And we talked about this element in my story. And he said something, along the lines of, in a sense, you didn't have informed consent of what you were getting yourself into. And I think in some regards, from my experiences with other people who've been in the shoes that we've been in, is that you're in the minority in terms of the intentionality and agency you had over sharing your story. And I think a lot of other people, I could name a few, which I won't, come at it more from my angle, and this feeling of burnout and this feeling of losing control does really come from not having that initial intentionality and control around the story. So I just think it's important for you to name, and I'm just grateful for you kind of talking through it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There was a bit of a serendipity. So a few days ago, we had a prep call for this interview. And immediately after, I had a call with a designer who is working on the issue of mental health and human-centered design. And she's so wonderful and talented, and she was telling me, Yoko, the way you share your personal story as the beginning of your work, maybe I should do more of that, because I also had a suicide in my family. And that was just immediately after we had that conversation that day, right? So I had an opportunity to share with her immediately, about the importance of intentionally setting the boundary before she sets out to share and create a narrative. And it's really for her, not for anybody else, but for her to protect herself. And she had lots of questions as to, and like all the answers really led to that. Like it's all about really protecting your boundary and yourself intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day. I think that piece of owning what you can own, especially if you're in a point where your story is all essentially part of your product, your service, or your impact, is so valuable, because especially if you're doing this in the social sector, whatever you want to call it, you are oftentimes not in the position of power. You are oftentimes appealing to funders, you're appealing to partners, and they view your story in a way that's different than you view it. They view you as something on whom they can fundraise, right? They view you as something that they can use in their marketing materials.
Right.
And I didn't understand that. And I think people need to know that going in, because they're not going to look out for, and I'm doing a generalization, but many of those organizations are not going to even be thinking about what your best interests are, because they're focused on a certain outcome for themselves.
Right. It's really insightful that coming from your experience in non-profit, but my experience wasn't non-profit, so I kind of assumed in not-for-profit world it's different from investors and things, but the framework is still very much similar. So yeah, that is very insightful.
There's this one piece that you do, which is like around what is the last sound you want to hear before you die, and I have a few questions on that, but I'm interested to start. Like, what have you learned from asking this question to other people?
My husband doesn't like when I use this phrase because it's grammatically incorrect, but I call this turning people into humans. And we asked this question to wide range of people, ranging from patient to a CEO of a large hospital organization to German engineers who do medical devices. We asked people in India, Iceland, Norway, Brazil, Japan. In almost every culture, people say, Miss Yoko, in our culture, it's taboo to talk about death. And I tell them, yes, everyone I talk to says that in almost every country. So it's kind of interesting that, there are lots of conflicts in the world. Now I'm going back to my root of somebody who studied international affairs. But fear of death is one thing that could actually unite all the humanity. And as an artist, I'm most fascinated by things that unite people universally. Part of that is coming from Japan, in small island, and confined in the rules that only apply to Japan, and I didn't want to be confined by that. So I always had a hunger to explore things that people across the cultures can find something. And I think this is one of such questions. It strips people from talking points and facade and titles, and people are forced to become vulnerable and a little awkward. And I would categorize the patterns of the answers into three. The first set of answers is a sound of nature. Almost universally, lots of people like sound of ocean and sound of water. The second set of category is a voice of loved ones. Voice of children, voice of mother who already passed on. And then the third category, a bunch of random, like weird answers, which I really enjoy. Sound of an orchestra tuning, getting ready for performance. Some people said a sound of a large machinery, like an engine starting to happen. And there are lots of people who name a particular song, a theme of certain movie, laughter. Yeah, like lots of very interesting answers there too.
So why given the theme of this podcast with In Stitches, where we're exploring parts of humor, I am interested in laughter. So why do you think laughter tends to come up from time to time?
Maybe laughter reveals a tiny moment of truth. Yeah, and I think there is when something is so tragic and beyond our control, like sometimes people choose to laugh, which seems really crazy. But yeah, there is some opening for a small moment of truth somehow, especially when I think about the Last Sound project. initially I started this when I was so burnt out of Sen Sound. I was thinking about quitting. It was immediately after the residency phase in Halcyon ended. And Ryan, who is our, like a collective caretaker, told me, just take 2 weeks off and you don't have to think about numbers and deliverables and all the things that we taught you. Just do something that you can still get excited and see what happens. And somehow what I found excited was the last sound people like to hear. So I did it. And that's what completely took this whole idea into all over the place. I did it with, medical device company engineers. They recorded the sounds they like to hear, like they would record their voice and stories, send it to me. I edit their voices, put them together into a piece of music, and I play. And they cry. The rational German engineers, and they would tell me, Yoko, we always have presenters here who talk about metrics and regulations and numbers. We never had an artist in our building talking about emotions. And in that kind of a instance, so when I create a 5-6 minutes piece of a music that has a voices of people talking about last sound, it could get really heavy, right? So typically I start with sound of nature because it's kind of a neutral, and then we typically go to voice of loved ones. This is where things get very wrenching, like lots of people start to reach the tissues here. And then I make sure to have couple of things here that's funny. So after crying, people get to laugh. And I think that is very important. Like in Indian classical music, I think one of my mentors told me they explore a set of emotions in a piece of music, and you have to hit every one of the emotions. And I try to do that with the piece, maybe except anger. Anger doesn't show up, but sadness, yearning, laughter, funny. And that is very important, I think. There is a, voice that talks about, I want the last sound I hear to be somebody telling, you are important. What you did matter to lots of people. And people typically laugh. There's a voice of me that says, it's a sound of my husband's fart that I like to hear. And people kind of laugh there. But there's also, fart is a sound of our normalcy, and that also implies I get to go first. That implies we are still together, which is nice, and I get to go before him, which is bad for my husband, but I don't want to go later. So there are lots of things around, but that fat jokes are always cheap humor, right?
We have a saying on this podcast that really everything ends back up at fart jokes. No matter where we are, we get back to fart jokes. And actually, you've kind of got the double whammy today. You've made a dick joke and you've made a fart joke.
Yes.
So you may have won the podcast. I feel like we've covered a lot here. I'll quote my co-host PJ Walsh when he says that laughter is the surprise recognition that we're not alone.
I like that. I love that.
And when you talk about the last sound you want to hear at the end of life, like these sounds have I think a theme, and not a universal theme, but at least a core theme of connection, right? Loved ones, connection to nature. Laughter is connection, just a feeling of connection. It's a recognition that other people are around. And I think that's there's something there. I'm not an expert on it, but I appreciate your reflection on that.
I love that. I love that quote. Yeah, it's like also laughter can be infectious. Like, yeah, other people laughing, it's just like, I don't know why it's funny, but it's just so funny sometimes. So
My favorite quote about humor and laughter, I think it's either humor or laughter is the virus that infects you with humanity.
I love that.
And it's just it kind of hits on that point of like it's this thing that is infectious. It connects you to other people. It makes you. It's a reminder. It's like almost a grounding thing, and it's like it embodies you in being a human being.
Yeah, which really makes me wonder. I observe, when I give a talk or presentation and share ideas, or sometimes challenging ideas. I don't know if you observe this too, that after people get to laugh, maybe they are a little more inclined to trust what you say. And maybe there is something to that sense of community that, like, once you open up and you laugh, like something is, broken here, like something that separated us. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what we experienced with ASAP, with our comedy programs, right? Where we would have people who, example I think about a lot is someone who's been shot multiple times, and they're talking about their experience being shot and maybe their experience with post-traumatic stress disorder after being shot. And if they were to talk about that in just a conversation with someone who doesn't have that lived experience, maybe doesn't have that military experience, it's going to be really hard to connect, because the person on the other side is saying, I could never imagine what you've gone through. I can never imagine even responding to that experience. But when you say it on stage and you say it as a joke, or you use humor as a means to deliver it, you kind of lower that barrier, right? We're now all on the same plane. I'm inviting you in to laugh at this thing, to laugh with me about this thing. And now we can have the grounds for a conversation and a dialogue that we couldn't have had otherwise. And I think that's aligned with what you're saying as well.
Yeah, it's almost like humor as a compassion, almost. I never thought about that. Yeah.
Wow. I feel like we've explored a lot here. So I have two questions kind of to bring us home. I think the first thing that I'm constantly struck by with you is the breadth of your work, right? Your work in hospitals, your public speaking, your music career. It's like you are doing a lot. And so how would you begin to answer just like what is enough for you?
Yeah, I just read that question like 3 minutes before I joined this meeting, and I was like, wow. So, as I got lucky from the health conditions, and I forget this often, and I have to reconnect with this idea as I say it. This part to me is a bonus. So it's already enough to me that every one thing I do is a added bonus, rather than if I don't do this and this, I would not be enough. That used to be my feeling. Like and all the psychological issues, the feeling of being inadequate and all that. But I strive to think that, yeah, after that experience, it's a bonus. And people often similarly ask, like, what is your dream? What is your business goal? And I no, this is already a dream. I can just do normal stuff, and that's enough. So I just enjoy and appreciate things that come to me. Having said that, because of the pandemic, I get to stay home way more than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding a urge to reconsider the balance in my life right now. Yeah.
So to close it out, we do have a common question, and I am, in light of that response, even more interested in your response to this question, which is, how do you want to be remembered, Yoko?
Wow, that was such a profound question. I think it would be nice to be remembered. Beyond that, I don't have any preference.
Mm.
It's just nice if people remembered some of the things, and I don't care. I just hope it's not a negative thing that people remember about me. But I feel like people often say trauma prevents growth in people because trauma kind of creates this halt in our life, so we kind of get stuck. But with the resolution of certain trauma, we can continue to grow and change and evolve. And sometimes it's meeting certain people, or even conversation like this, you discover things that you didn't know about you, or there is an element of you that didn't get amplified much that starts to get amplified. So people probably remember different aspects of people, and I just think it would be nice to be remembered in some way if that's possible. Yeah.
I think, without sounding too corny here, I think we'll definitely remember you.
Thank you.
And I was laughing when you said something negative, because offline Dave and I were like talking about how you're probably the closest thing that we've encountered to like an angel, like embodying like an angel on earth. So I very hard time believing there will be negative memories.
You're tricked by my external narrative. You're a victim of my external narrative.
You're really good at it then. Well, Yoko, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yoko.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Yoko Sen for joining, for sharing, for being so open with us. Again, I'm continually blown away by just the guests' willingness to kind of share their experiences. We also have a ton of other thank yous to make. Dave, thank you for both being the host and the executive producer, working double duty this week. We also have a growing team behind the scenes. I want to thank our comms folk, Matt Condon and Kristen Howard, for helping us kind of start to finish on the comms side of things. And I want to thank all of you for continuing to tune in. PJ, I think you do the social.
Oh, like jump in now?
Yes.
Hey everybody, I'm back. This is PJ Walsh. I've been gone for a minute, but I'm just here for the tail end to thank you guys, and to please visit us on all our social media platforms. In Stitches Pod, In Stitches Podcast. We got a website coming. We have lots of great guests. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And David, thank you for filling in. You were awesome.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you, Sam.
This has been In Stitches.